Now the next chapter is really interesting, the two witnesses. And I've alluded to this in the previous chapters, because as I say, all of the information keeps coming round, and so it's continuously reinforced. So the two witnesses. Then I was given a measuring rod, like a staff, and was told, "Come and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there." So to measure is to assess, to evaluate. And the temple of God is the crown chakra and your spiritual connection. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations that they will trample over the holy city for 42 months. Just be concerned with the pineal, if you like, and the crown. Leave the rest to its own devices. Now that's interesting, because the pineal and the crown are the two protected chakra energy centers. The two witnesses, they don't change, they're not affected. It's particularly the pineal is the witness to everything. It's the storehouse, remember, of all events. We could also say that the two witnesses are the Christ consciousness, because remember the Christ sits in the throne of the pineal, third eye, and the God consciousness, or the supra consciousness, if you like, of the crown center. So again, many interpretations there. And to assess the interior self is another translation, and to leave all of the external stuff. Don't be concerned with what's going on in the world. Just assess what's going on within you. And then the important thing, the really interesting thing that comes about again, is this period of 42 months. Now 42 months, 3.5 years. Okay, so the cycles of God, the number of God is 7. Half a cycle is 3.5 years. Jesus kind of disappeared till he was 30. Then he taught for 3.5 years. He was crucified. He was away for 3 days roughly. And then he was resurrected. So these numbers are very powerful and very synchronous. And as you'll see as we go through, this 3.5 year time scale is repeated in different forms, but it's the same time scale. So you'll hear 42 months, which is 3.5 years, 1,260 days, again the 3.5 years. But what I think it's alluding to more than anything is 36 years of life. So what happens between 35 and 45 is the soul or the spirit starts to wake up. We used to call it a midlife crisis. You've done everything society told you to do, or the ego told you to do. You've got the house, you've got the car, you've got a career, you've done all those external things. And then the spirit starts to go, well, hang on a minute, but you're still not happy. Therefore, there must be something else here. And that's when the spirit starts to wake. And if you've got nowhere to go with that, like they didn't in, these past generations, they'd want to be free. So they'd have an affair, do something crazy. And again, my spiritual awakening was at 40. So again, I could go through the synchronicity of my life. 3.5 years, in between things is a really constant pattern, etc. But I won't bore you with it all now. Okay, so we'll go back a little bit. For it is given over to the nations, and they will trample over the holy city for 42 months, 3.5 years. And I will grant my 2 witnesses authority to prophesy for 1,260 days, wearing sackcloth. So again, sackcloth is a period of mourning, a period of loss. So whilst outside of the temple, the ego is running wild, the 2 spiritual centers will be mourning, will be knowing what's coming, prophecy, but they'll be in a period of mourning and loss in that time. Remember, God's allowing this. This has to happen for it all to come up and be cleansed. These are the two olive trees. Now, olive trees spiritually relate to anointed ones, blessed ones. That's the two witnesses. And the two lampstands. So again, the lampstands, the chakra energy centers, if you remember all the symbology from the beginning and the letters, etc. So it's clearly telling us about the two anointed chakras, the two protected chakras. So these are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth, the Lord of the body. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes. Anyone who wants to harm them must be killed in this manner. Fire, transformed. Okay, transformed, not destroyed, transformed. They have the authority to shut the sky so that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. Now in Genesis, it talks about there was no rain on the earth. The rain came after the creation of the physical earth as such. So it's alluding to that, to how we used to be. And they have authority over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. So again, in some ways the body can turn against itself if it needs to protect these two chakras. When they had finished their testimony, the beast, so the repressions, etc., of the ego that comes up from the bottomless pit, will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city. The great city is your spiritual self, if you like, that is prophetically called Sodom and Egypt, because obviously it's been defiled by, your lust and your lasciviousness and all of those other things that the ego loves, where also their Lord was crucified. So your spirituality was crucified there. So it appears like the two centers that are responsible for your spirituality have shut down, have died, have closed, whatever language you want to use. So you'll be lost, you'll be cut off from spiritual nourishment, loss of the spiritual self, but they're not dead, okay? That's what you have to remember. For 3.5 days, now there's that 3.5 again, members of the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. And the inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and celebrate and exchange greetings, because these two prophets have been a torment to the inhabitants of the earth. So the rest of the body, the rest of the mind, the ego is celebrating because it believes that it's killed its tormentors, it's won the battle for the body and the mind and the spirit. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of the life of God entered them, i.e., they open back up again, if you like. The will of God flows back through and they're brought back to life, they're resurrected, and stood on their feet. And those who saw them were terrified. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." So raise your vibration, listen to the God source, accept the God will that's starting to flow through now. And then they went up to heaven in a cloud. Their enemies watched them. At that moment there was a great earthquake, so a huge upheaval within the body, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past, the third woe is coming very soon. So what that's alluding to again is that now the rest, or another third you might say, of the spiritual energy of the body, of the ego is given up. is cleansed, is purified, so that now the majority of you, if you like, is now returned to its spiritual nature and its body returned to spiritual health, etc. So many things are happening alongside each other. That's why we continuously see, and we will continue to see, this number of 3.5, 3.6, because things are happening alongside each other. So it's not that this happens, this happens, this happens, but whilst you're being spiritually attacked by the ego, and there's a period when, you know, it looks like you're lost and that the ego is winning. It's not, because God is there. God is feeding through his energy, his nourishment. It's like, yeah, bring it all up. Put all your cards on the table so that I can see where all the problems are, and then I can deal with them all. So again, another really powerful chapter. It will feel like the spirit within you is being killed, but it's only allowing this so that everything can be brought and faced and released. So those two witnesses within you are eternal, cannot be touched, cannot be damaged, and are there, always there. And then we hear the seventh trumpet. Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever." Then the 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshipped, singing. Remember, the elders physically are the 12 pairs of cranial nerves, or the 24% of the original brain, of the original consciousness. "We give you thanks, Lord Almighty, who are and who were, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign." Things have really changed, really been transformed. "The nations raged, but your wrath has come, and the time for judging the dead and rewarding your servants, the prophets and the saints and all who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying those who destroy the earth," which is the body, remember. "Then God's temple in heaven was opened," the crown opened, "and the Ark of the Covenant was seen within the temple." The Ark of the Covenant, the agreement God made with the people of Israel, the chosen people. Then you've reached a certain level of spirituality where all this opens and you see that covenant and you remember God and God remembers you. And the Ark of the Covenant was seen within his temple, and there are flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake and heavy hail. Everything changes in the body and the mind and the spirit. A spiritual transformation.